Chapter 21. David, how strong are you? I didn't expect Father to testify for Rex. Clark was still a little surprised that evening. During the day, Rex had stayed by their family fruit stand, never out of sight, but Jonathan, who had always made no secret of his dislike for Rex, had actually stepped forward to be a witness for him, helping clear him of suspicion. David raised an eyebrow. "Do you think Father would lie just to give Rex trouble?" Clark scratched his chin. It felt impossible. The remark was almost an accusation against everything their father had taught them. Honesty is a clear mirror of who you are. I don't want that mirror tarnished for the son of Krypton or anyone else. Jonathan came in from outside, shrugged off his coat, and spread his arms. "Especially in front of you two." The farm had done well today. The fresh fruit fetched a good price, and he was in a cheerful mood. Who was it that was late for a date with me when he was young? Said his motorcycle broke down, but it turned out he'd just overslept. Martha chuckled as she came in behind him. Sometimes a white lie does no harm. Jonathan, a little embarrassed, hugged his wife and gave his sons a conspiratorial wink. Otherwise, how would we have this warm home? Despite the relaxed atmosphere, Clark could tell his father's dislike of Rex was unchanged. He turned to the more troubling subject. Today was odd. Rex never left the market. Who robbed the bank? He replayed the events in his head, puzzlement in his voice. Lots of people saw Rex, and the bank's CCTV caught him too. Maybe the robber looked a lot like Lex Luthor, Martha suggested from the kitchen, where she'd been washing up. Rex had only been in town a short while. Not many people knew him well. They might have mistaken someone else for him, she said, drying her hands and smiling. Jonathan, remember Jack Gold from our school days? With the curly hair, he used to mimic our English teacher's accent until he got caught and hauled into the principal's office. Jonathan laughed and nodded. He always seemed to get away with being funny for a while. Clark shrugged. Maybe someone thought they looked enough like Lex and decided to take a chance. The police report had painted the scene. A man who looked like Lex Luthor went into the bank to withdraw money, and the branch manager, thrilled to see a major client, greeted him warmly. But when it came time to sign, the signature didn't match the one on file. The bank manager casually asked to see his driver's license to process things differently. Then the robber pulled a gun. Fortunately, no one was hurt. The town spent the day buzzing about that. But Clark had another worry, one he didn't voice in front of his parents. He and David exchanged a brief, knowing look. Both understood the unspoken thought. Even if their parents knew metahumans existed, they tried not to alarm them. After dinner, they went up to the attic of the warehouse. A cool night breeze came in, and the wheat fields beyond lay quiet under the moon. David turned to Clark, who had slipped back inside a little late. "Where did you go?" "Nothing," Clark said, scratching his head. David and Jarek had fought earlier and damaged the road. Clark had been worried someone might drive into the hole at night, so he'd gone to check. "You're really kind," he added. David sighed. "When I went, the outsourced road crew had just finished up. They were baffled by the damage. They said even if a dozen tons of steel had fallen off a truck, it wouldn't have caused that kind of gouge." Clark described what he'd seen, then glanced at David with a half-joking look. "David, how strong are you? Is this your attempt to bond by challenging me to arm wrestle?" David narrowed his eyes. "How old are you?" "No. Good. I'm not doing arm wrestling with you either." "You should work on hiding your agenda, Clark." He shoved his hands in his pockets and looked out into the night. "I don't think there's anything wrong with asking straight up." Clark always spoke with that tone, the younger brother who sounded older and wiser, and it irked him a little. David chuckled. "You expect me to say I'm not trying to figure out how strong I am? Fine, I won't tell you." After a beat, David added, almost as an afterthought, "To be honest, I don't even really know myself." Clark leaned forward, curious again. "Do you think the person impersonating Rex to rob the bank could be a metahuman?" The question surprised David, but he considered it. Having run into two metahumans recently had made Clark jumpy. Now any strange event triggered that same pattern of thought. "Maybe," David said slowly. He wasn't ruling it out, but he didn't assume every weird thing was metahuman related. If it was, he might be able to take bullets to the body. Clark's expression went serious. Even Jarek, who had super strength measured in the hundreds of tons, didn't have that kind of resistance. This could be someone far more dangerous. Reports in town said the robber had been wearing a light suit, not an obvious bulletproof vest, but people had seen him shot twice in the back and walk away unharmed. To ordinary eyes, the only explanation was some kind of body protection, but David didn't dismiss the metahuman angle. "Don't worry," David said, patting Clark's shoulder as he headed downstairs. "The bank robber probably won't bother with the farm." Clark watched him go, still uneasy. "I just hope everyone else is all right." Thump, thump, thump. Early the next morning, in the town's antique shop, Catherine, her hair shot through with gray, clambered up the stairs with a red backpack full of money and pounded on her daughter's door. "Tina, where did you get all this money?" Tina came out of her room, towel wrapped around her head from a recent wash, casually drying her hair. "I told you, our lives are getting better. Don't tell me you robbed the bank yesterday," Catherine said, clinging to a last hope. "Of course not." Tina smiled, her features still pretty with a high nose and long reddish-brown hair. Then, in an instant, the smile froze. Click, click. Her skin seemed to flow like clay. Her face shifted, grew taller and broader, and her hair disappeared. In moments, she was transformed into the bald, cold-faced Rex, a smirk on her lips. Lex Luthor did it. Chapter 22. Black. Lex Luthor did it. Tina spoke in a rough, masculine voice, her tone flippant. The mimicry faded as quickly as it had come. She idly twisted a strand of hair around her finger, a hint of regret in her eyes. "It's a shame the signature gave it away. If it hadn't, I wouldn't have had to snatch it yesterday. You promised me you wouldn't use that ability anymore." Catherine's lips trembled with anger and hurt. The idea that her daughter had actually robbed a bank cut her to the bone. "I'm doing this for our own good," Tina replied, pupils dilating with excitement, cheeks flushed. "After Father died, we've been relying on this little antique shop on a street nobody comes down. We're running out of food and clothes." Tina waved a hand, almost proudly. "Look at this money. It's only the start. Soon I'll live like Lana." Lana's aunt ran a successful flower shop that brought in far more than their crumbling store. Lana had always been the thing Tina envied most. Pretty, well-off, everyone's favorite. Tina's voice turned bitter. "Enough. I don't want to see you hurt." "Hurt?" Tina laughed as if the word were a joke. "A bank security guard shot me twice in the back. It only ruined one of my suits." Catherine tried to soften, to reason, but the words had lost their power. "Tina, no one's life is perfect. Not even Lana's." Tina's face hardened. She had heard that comparison since childhood. Lana, the swan, her, the ugly duckling. This money was stolen. Sick of arguing, Catherine's expression went stern. She headed for the stairs. "I'll return it. I'll say I found it by a garbage truck." "Don't be like that, Mother. Why can't we have some happiness?" Tina pushed after her and grabbed the school bag Catherine was carrying. In the struggle, she used too much force. The bag slipped free, Catherine stumbled, and the old woman tumbled down the stairs. Her brittle body rolled and hit the wall. Her head struck hard. She lay still, unconscious, her condition unknown. "Mom!" Tina's eyes went wide. She dropped the bag and raced down the stairs. She snatched up the phone to call for help, but something flickered across her face. A calculation, a chill. Then she set the phone down and walked away. Before physical education class, everyone changed in the locker room. "Ah!" Clark's vision blurred. He rubbed his eyes and opened them, only to see bodies as if stripped to the bone, flesh hung like a taut membrane, veins dark under the skin. The sight was a horror movie tableau. "Clark?" Pietro beside him glanced over at the scream, puzzled. To Clark, the world had become a gallery of living skeletons. He stumbled back, hands over his eyes. "My eyes! My eyes! What's wrong?" A muscular figure, flesh-toned like an ancient sculpture, turned toward him, frowning. David, who had just put on his shirt, asked, looking at Clark with concern. Clark's retreat carried him toward the locker room wall, and the strange new vision pushed through plaster and paint. He was suddenly looking into the girls' locker room next door. Girls in underwear, changing, chatting. Among them was Lana. The sight fixed him like a moth to a lamp. His future as Superman would later be written in many ways, but in that moment, his eyes stayed on Lana, as if there were nowhere else to look. A foolish, clean-toothed smile crept across his face. "What's wrong with your eyes?" Pietro asked again. Clark had gone from screaming to staring blankly, smiling like a fool. Nothing. Clark forced the word out, trying to shake off the daze and pushing Pietro away. Pietro left first. Clark finished dressing slowly, reluctant to look away from the wall. David watched him, arms folded, and smirked as if he had guessed the truth. "You're bleeding from your nose, Clark." Distracted, Clark touched his nose frantically. No blood. "I wouldn't bleed from my nose like that by myself." David's eyes twinkled with teasing insight. Under that look, Clark felt exposed and awkward and moved his gaze as if ashamed. Had David seen through something? Had he guessed about the strange new sight Clark couldn't control? Later at home, Clark sat on the couch while Martha fretted, and Jonathan listened quietly, hands smoothing his wife's back. David leaned against the dining table, arms crossed, a faint smile on his face. Clark kept his gaze low. "Sometimes I can see through things," he said finally, voice muffled as if behind a pillow. "Like X-ray." "Can't you control it?" Jonathan asked, alarmed. These new abilities had been arriving in fits lately. The recent flotation incident was still fresh in their memories, and none of it made sense. Clark looked up at David, hoping for help. "I don't know how to control it," Clark admitted. The confusion and guilt showed on his face. David snorted. "Before gym, you were staring at the wall like you were reading a book. I didn't see your power fail. Some of these things depend on whether you want them to." He sounded teasing, but also oddly practical. "Eyes have muscles too, blinking and focusing. Maybe you can learn to control it." Jonathan didn't press further in that moment. He only urged Clark to be careful. Martha, more worried, began gathering laundry to go out. Jonathan left to feed the cows. David wandered closer. He'd noticed the way Clark had looked, ashamed, guilty, and spoke softly. "What else did you want to tell your parents anyway? Confess something." Clark swallowed. With his parents already anxious about sudden changes, there was no use piling on. He lowered his voice. "My strength's been increasing faster these last 2 days." David raised an eyebrow in surprise. "What do you think's causing it?" Clark considered. Beyond the obvious emergence of supervision, the strength surge was new and worrying. "Maybe it's just late-stage puberty," he said. 18 was a time of enormous physical change. David's expression shifted from teasing to bemused. "You're not an alien, are you?" Clark's face heated. David, catching the look, grinned. "Aliens have puberties too, you know?" Clark looked away, embarrassed, but the admission hung in the room like a question everyone felt but no one wanted to say out loud. Whoosh! A cold wind cut through the town that afternoon, and the sky looked as if it could open up at any moment. Martha had gone to town to run errands, and Clark and his younger brother David went along to help carry the groceries. People hurried past under umbrellas that weren't yet open. As Clark loaded 2 bulky bottles of discounted laundry detergent into the car, his vision wavered. Color drained away, sound dimmed, and the world snapped into a silent, black-and-white film. The people on the street were no longer people, but bare skeletons. A woman carrying a basket of vegetables brushed past, and Clark flinched. David saw it. The supervision was acting up again. "Control it with your heart," David said quietly. "Don't fear it. Don't fight it." David's voice carried the kind of calm conviction Clark needed. He thought of when Zod first arrived on Earth, how quickly the other Kryptonian adapted to the sun and to his powers. Zod had been a trained warrior and had learned fast. Clark, by contrast, always treated his abilities as something odd that made him different. Resisting them only made them harder to manage. He had to accept them, not push them away. Before Clark could answer, something in his periphery snapped into focus. Among the X-rayed crowd, one figure glowed a jade green, an eerie, inner light that set it apart. It reminded Clark of the meteorites that had come with him and that always sapped him whenever he got close. He felt a wash of weakness at the memory. "Martha, are you all right?" David asked. Martha had already come out of the supermarket and saw Clark's pallor. "Let's go home," she said. Clark shook his head. He watched the green glowing skeleton walk into the antique shop across the street. He forced himself to breathe and to be still. 2 seconds stretched, and then the X-ray vision receded. The world righted itself. David grinned. "See? You don't have to fight it. You just have to let it be." Clark felt oddly pleased and vaguely annoyed that this gift was his, and yet his little brother seemed to understand its rules better than he did. "Thanks," he muttered. Martha quickly brightened for a moment. "You said you were going to the antique shop, didn't you?" she asked. Clark had indeed seen the green figure enter the antique shop. "The lamp in our bedroom broke," Martha said. "Aunt Catherine was going to fix it." They crossed to the cramped shop. The tiny bell chimed as they pushed the door open. Shelves were stuffed with a miscellaneous life of things: porcelain under glass, framed oil paintings, a wall clock frozen at 3 minutes, embroidered shawls, and a few small, oddly carved tribal figurines in the shadows. It smelled faintly of dust and old paper. A woman came out from the back. "Martha? How have you been?" She smiled with practiced warmth. Martha smiled back without suspicion. This was the Aunt Catherine she'd known for years. The same shape of nose, the same laugh lines beside her eyes. "Not bad. I'm here to pick up the lamp." Catherine appeared puzzled. Clark's eyes floated to the counter, and he fought to turn the strange sight back on. He clenched his eye muscles and held his breath. After several tense seconds, the vision slid into place again. Behind the counter, a body glowed with that same meteorite-like jade. It looked for a moment like a young woman, then sagged into a hunched, older shape. Clark felt a chill. He remembered Aunt Catherine's daughter, Tina. She went to the town high school, though not in Clark's class. The figure behind the counter did not match the Catherine standing before them. Catherine, still smiling, went to the back of the shop. "I'll get the lamp," she said. A faint, odd smell reached David's nose. He sniffed and frowned. Clark tried to catch it, but nothing came through for him. The other senses he had as a Kryptonian weren't fully awake yet. Martha, ordinary human, noticed nothing. Catherine returned, shaking her head apologetically. "I'm sorry, Martha. The lamp hasn't been fixed yet. Could you come back next week?" Martha laughed it off. "Of course." She turned to leave, but a wad of cash peeking out from under a cabinet near the stairs caught her eye. She stooped and picked it up. "What's this?" Catherine's smile collapsed for a heartbeat. "Oh!" She snatched the bills with a small, too eager motion. "A customer paid in cash, and I must have set it down. Thank you, Martha. I've been looking for this all day." Martha skeet, handing the money back. "You should keep it safer than that, Catherine. That's not pocket change." Outside, as they walked away, Martha's voice dropped. "That band around the bundle was from the savings and loan. Didn't the bank get robbed this morning?" David's eyes kept flicking back to the shop. "Catherine looked terrified when you picked it up. She looked like she'd been expecting it to show up." Clark's stomach sank. He turned and peered through the antique shop window. The hunched figure they'd seen inside straightened, muscles and bones lengthening until it took on the shape they'd glimpsed earlier. And then, inside a cracked display case near the back, something terrible and unmistakable. A female body, collapsed and pale, compacted and old, blood-clotted and gone cold. "That wasn't Aunt Catherine," Clark said, his voice shaky. There's a body in there." Martha stopped in mid-step. Her face tightened with a new private alarm. "My God." She reached for Clark's arm. "Let's go home. Jonathan and I will call the police. Jonathan will know what to do." She hesitated an instant, and a mother's instinct took over. She did not want Clark walking back into something that could get him hurt. They left the shop quickly. From inside, when the door finally closed behind them, the corpse in the cabinet seemed to melt, flesh folding and sliding like clay, until its features rearranged into a recognizable, living face. The girl who stepped out held herself like someone who had never been dead at all. Her voice, thin and elated, cut through the gloom. "No one can stop me from taking what I want," she said. "No one can stop me from getting my happiness." Chapter 24. Just in case. Back at the farm, Jonathan could only stare. "You're saying you saw Catherine, but Catherine might already be dead?" After listening to his wife and 2 sons, the green glowing skeleton, the deformity, the body, the money, Jonathan was confused. "The person who greeted us in the antique shop was the one who robbed the bank?" David nodded. Putting Clark's earlier observations together, the pieces fell into place for him. First it was Luther, then Catherine. She can shapeshift, turn into other people. "Who could that be?" Martha asked, rubbing her arms. The idea was terrifying. Someone could take the face of someone you trusted and approach you without any warning. Clark frowned. They had a few things for sure. The skeleton had been female, and there weren't many other clues. "It's Tina," David said suddenly. The family looked at him, puzzled. "Why would it be Tina?" Clark asked. "She has that kind of ability." David explained. "Why would she transform into Aunt Catherine's appearance after killing someone when she could have escaped? The police would never find her unless Catherine is dead, and the police will come looking for her." He stepped through the logic. Tina was the only close relative. No matter who killed Catherine, the police would question her. So Tina stole the money and then killed her mother. Maybe she's doing it out of guilt. "Catherine?" Martha murmured, grief washing over her. "Don't be so certain, son." Jonathan squeezed his wife's cold hand. He couldn't quite accept the idea of a daughter killing her own mother. David watched his father's reaction, sympathetic but silent. "Her skeleton looked different," Clark said, thinking back. It glowed a strange green, and the rib lines were odd, uneven, varying thickness. "That fits," David said. "Catherine was older when she had Tina. Tina was born with osteochondrodysplasia." Martha's face went pale as memories surfaced. She and her husband searched for doctors everywhere. The doctors said she might not live past first grade. They spent everything chasing experimental treatments, but nothing worked. Jonathan took over. They had to move back to the small town. And then, somehow, Tina improved. It felt like a miracle. David nodded. When the meteorite first fell, charlatans came through town, claiming the meteorite was a gift from God and that drinking water infused with it could cure any disease. Everyone understood what he meant. If Catherine and her husband had no other options, they would have tried anything. After seeing their daughter recover, they would have been grateful, never imagining that the cure might turn her into something dangerous. David's right. It could be Tina. Clark's eyes widened as the theory fit with every clue. The skeleton had glowed because Tina had been drinking meteorite-infused water since childhood. "Call the police," he said. "Now that you saw the body, call them." Jonathan hesitated only a moment, then picked up the phone. He explained that money possibly from a bank robbery had been found in Catherine's antique shop and that there was a cadaverous smell. Police cars were dispatched right away. "They're on their way," Jonathan told the family. David frowned. This wasn't foolproof. The K-Town rumor made sense. Kryptonite exposure, spending time near it, being exposed to its radiation, or even consuming it, could enhance a person's abilities. Was that how Tina became so powerful? "I'm going to take the afternoon off from school," he said, "just in case." Clark looked at him and then at their parents. "I'll take the rest of the day off too." They both felt the same. Better to stay and protect their parents. Even if it turned out to be a false alarm, they would rather be safe than regret not being there. There was a knock at the front door. Looking through the glass, they saw Lex Luthor in the dim light, smiling politely. "May I come in?" Jonathan and Martha both stood, anxious. David and Clark moved forward, instinctively shielding their parents. Clark tried to activate his X-ray vision to check Lex's skeleton, but nerves made him slow. Lex opened the outer door, half joking. "It's me, no evil twin and no gun." He held up his hands. "Clark, David, Mr. Kent, you know I'm innocent, right?" "Quick," Clark urged, focusing. He finally brought the world into X-ray clarity and scanned Lex from head to toe. He breathed out in relief and relaxed. The skeleton was normal. This was the real Lex Luthor. Martha opened the door. "Please come in. Mr. Luthor," she said. "I watched the CCTV. I don't know how that person did it, but they looked almost exactly like me. If it weren't for the different signature on the banknotes, I might have lost everything." Lex smiled, genuine gratitude in his expression. "I wanted to thank you. Without your testimony, I might not have been cleared." He stayed only a few minutes, exchanging polite conversation. The mood in the house felt somber, and his visit didn't quite fit. After a short time, he said goodbye, walked out to his silver-gray convertible, glanced back at the Kent house, frowned as if wondering about something, and drove away. Jonathan turned to his sons. "If Tina is powerful, we need to be careful." He thought a moment and made a decision. "You two stay home with us. Say you have the spring flu. Take the day off. Clark will stay and protect us, and I'll call an acquaintance to check with the police. Maybe they'll catch Tina." David and Clark exchanged a look and settled back into the living room. They would wait and be ready, just in case. Chapter 25. Start with you, Martha. As dusk fell, Jonathan called the police. The small-town officers arrived, took statements, and the police chief, Bob, an old high school classmate of Jonathan's, came with a couple of deputies. "Bob, have you caught the killer?" Jonathan asked. "We found Catherine's body in her antique shop," Bob said. "No money was found. The killer may have taken it. We staked the place out for a long time, but whoever did this might have escaped. We haven't seen anyone suspicious in town. Catherine's daughter, Tina, is missing. We suspect she may be involved, or she may be another victim." According to the coroner, Catherine had been dead a while, Bob added, frowning as he remembered the bizarre bank robbery. "It doesn't seem like the Catherine your wife met today." Jonathan didn't know what to say. After Bob left, he sighed and turned to his wife and sons. "Bad news. The police didn't find anything." "This might be for the best," Martha said uneasily. "Tina has strange abilities. A gun might not stop her. If she really is dangerous, Bob and his men could have been in real danger." David and Clark weren't surprised. They hadn't expected the police to catch Tina. Night settled over the farm, stars coming out as a cold wind pushed the wheat low. Under the porch light, David and Clark took positions on either side of the farmhouse door, ready in case Tina came for their parents. If she attacked, they wanted her to have to get through them first. Clark's super hearing would catch any attempt to circle behind. "She'd better be impatient enough to come for revenge tonight," David said, staring into the dark. His voice was a low, icy wind. Tina needed to keep pretending to be Catherine to avoid attention. If she had stayed away from town for half a day, she probably already knew the police had been called and could easily guess who'd tipped them off. There's a proverb about catching a thief for a day and guarding against one for 1,000. No one could keep watch forever. Based on the autopsy, the pathologist thinks Aunt Catherine fell down the stairs and died from a head injury, Clark said hesitantly, scanning the field with his supervision. "What are you getting at?" David asked. Clark glanced back at their parents in the living room and lowered his voice. "Let me deal with Tina when she shows up. I'll subdue her." There was a cold firmness in Clark's tone that went beyond the grief over Jarek, whose death Clark had a hand in. He didn't want David getting blood on his hands again if he could avoid it. "And then?" David asked. Clark kept up his persuasion, patient despite the question being old and familiar. David crossed his arms but wasn't angry. "I've thought of a plan." Clark raised an eyebrow, a small, triumphant grin. "A way to subdue her without her realizing who I am or revealing my abilities." "Oh," David's interest was piqued. Clark fished out a knitted blue hood from his pocket. After checking the road, he pulled it over his head, leaving only his eyes visible. "Can you still tell who I am, David?" Clark lowered his voice into a mock deep tone. "A robber on his way to hold up a bank?" David's eyelids twitched. The son of Krypton had finally thought to hide his identity, but the hood looked so much like a bank robber's that David couldn't help teasing him. "You got the idea from comics." Clark didn't mind being teased. He'd found an answer to a practical problem. "I can't stop someone like Garrick from trying to blurt out what I am when he's being subdued. But I can make him think an unknown person did it. So later, don't move. Let me handle them. Don't let our parents see anything unusual." Clark believed that if they could make the attackers think an ordinary stranger had taken them down, there would be no need to put them in a vegetative state or kill them to keep them silent. He didn't know David had other motives. While Clark talked, a slender figure walked up from the lane, arms wrapped around herself against the cold. Her dark hair was pinned back, her cheeks flushed like someone who'd been crying. She hesitated on the porch, looking lost. "Clark, David, why are you out here?" she asked. "Lana?" Clark spun toward her, startled. "Wait, how did you find me?" He touched his face under the hood. "Your clothes, your height, mostly, you're standing next to David." Lana's eyes were red. Her voice was rough, edged with emotion. Clark's excitement at seeing his crush made him forget for a moment to be cautious. David shot him a warning elbow. Clark blinked and collected himself. He still hadn't confirmed whether this was really Lana. He flipped on his supervision. Lana, or the woman claiming to be Lana, looked like she might break down. "My aunt thinks I should give Whitney another chance. I fought with her and have nowhere to go. Can I come in and sit for a while?" She took a step forward, face pleading. "Stop!" Clark snapped, and what he saw through his vision made him furious. Underneath the woman's skin, a green skeleton glowed, a telltale sign. "Don't try to fool me. You're not Lana," Clark said. "What are you talking about? If I'm not Lana, then who am I?" the woman protested, voice full of hurt. David's expression turned cold. "Tina, it's not too late. Turn yourself in." For a moment, Clark's heart lurched at the guilty, tearful look the woman wore. He bit his lip to steady himself and spoke with a man's authority. Inside, Jonathan and Martha had noticed their sons blocking the woman at the door. Jonathan reached for his shotgun and moved to shield his wife. Tina's eyes narrowed as the trap closed. Her voice came out sharp, like steel. She dropped the Lana act. Her shape rippled and reasserted itself. "You ruined my life," she hissed. "I wanted your family to die one by one at the hands of those they trusted, dying in shock, confusion, and pain." Clark, David, Jonathan, and Martha stared as the ugly truth settled over them. Clark stepped forward, pressing the accusation. "Was Aunt Catherine's death an accident, or did you do it?" Tina's pupils pinpricked with rage. "How did you recognize me?" she spat. She'd expected the Kents might suspect disguises, but not immediate recognition. Clark didn't answer. He moved closer. "You've been seen through, which takes away some of the fun, but it doesn't stop me from killing you. Starting with you, Martha." Tina's gaze snapped past Clark and zeroed in on Martha. With a sudden burst of speed, she shattered the winter grass and launched herself toward the house, aiming straight for Martha. Swish. In Tina's eyes, the shotgun in Jonathan's hands was no more threatening than a fireplace poker. The moment she leapt, grass and dust sprayed up, and everything around them seemed to slow. Clark moved with the same speed, scooped Tina up across his waist, and ran. He'd seen how fast she could move and was confident he could restrain her, but he'd also seen the power in her single kick that cracked the ground. She could smash a fence into splinters without trying. Clark didn't want any accidents. He carried her away and put distance between them. David took off after them at an athlete's sprint. "I'll go help Clark. Father, you protect Mother." Jonathan raised the shotgun and called after him, but David was already gone. Under the streetlights of the suburban road, Clark slowed to set Tina down. Instead of surrendering, Tina's vision blurred and she reacted, clapping both hands into Clark's back. The impact knocked him off balance. He slammed into the pavement so hard the asphalt cracked and pebbles skittered. "You've got powers too, Clark," Tina hissed and grabbed for his throat. Clark gripped her wrist and planted his feet, serious. "Tina, before you make a worse mistake, you can still stop. If Aunt Catherine's death had more to it than met the eye, if Tina hadn't been the one who killed anyone, if she'd only robbed a bank, then Clark's warning still made sense. But Tina only sneered. "Mistake?" she said. "I'm using what I've got to get what I want. What's wrong with that?" She lunged like a charging cheetah, closing the distance in a flash and throwing a fist that whistled through the night air. A single punch landed. A cold, precise blur struck Tina and blew her back like a stone hurled across a lake. She hit the ground hard, ricocheted, and finally skidded to a stop dozens of meters away. Clark, still reeling from Tina's earlier strike, was sent flying 6 or 7 meters by the shockwave. David stood under the streetlight, rubbing his knuckles. His face was ice. "Your bones are pretty dense," he said. Tina, bruised and dazed, squinted at him. Recognition flickered. "David?" Her expression curdled into fury. "The older brother has powers. The younger brother is a monster." She launched herself again, blurring with speed, swinging a punch intended to finish him. David sidestepped one blow and grasped her wrist as the second came. "Nice strength," he said, voice flat. "Too bad it's all brute force." He didn't seem to use any trained technique. His hand simply locked around her wrist and tightened. Pressure built like the squeeze of a hydraulic press. Tina screamed, pulled and twisted, but she couldn't break free. Pain shot up her arm. Bones groaned. She tried to bite and claw, and with her other hand swung toward David's head, but he didn't flinch. Then he increased the pressure until it was obscene. It felt as if even a steel ingot would be crushed to slag. Her mouth opened in a raw scream. In that moment of panic, Tina's face melted and reshaped, a cruel, practiced trick. She forced her features into the face of a woman with deeper-lined eyes, a particular expression of pain. It was Martha's face. "Duh, David," she whispered, a grotesque mimicry meant to break him. For the beat after, David's grip loosened as if shocked. Tina thought she'd won, that seeing their mother's face would stop him. The relief was brief. Rage flared across David's expression. Before she could move, a huge hand clamped around her head and slammed her face down into the gravel. Dirt and grit flew. Tina's skull slammed against the road again and again. She cried out, voice muffled against the stones. "Let go, David!" Clark yelled, lunging in and grabbing David's wrist. He pulled with everything he had, but David didn't budge. Clark tried to brace and use both hands. David flung his arm back like the movement of a weightless thing, and Clark was thrown off balance. David's fist came down. Tina's arms went limp. Her face had been buried in the dirt and she stopped moving. "Tina!" Clark shouted as he rolled her over. She was still breathing, mercifully, but she wouldn't wake. No matter how they shook her or called her name, she lay limply, eyes glazed. "You've turned someone into a vegetable again." Clark spat at his brother, fury and disgust burning in his voice. "And using Mom's face, I was holding back. I didn't kill her because I was trying to be merciful." David stood, dust on his jacket, clapping his hands once as if to clean them. He looked down at Tina without remorse. Her inner state had run a full course in seconds. Dazed, panicked, bewildered at the loss of control, then the cold, absolute terror. He hadn't killed her. That wasn't his point. "In a high-security prison," he said quietly, "they put the worst into solitary. A tiny cell, no talking, a sliver of light from the door. You can't even see your own hands. After 3 days of that, the worst will stop fighting." He let the image hang between them like a sentence. What he meant was clear enough. What awaited Tina would be a prolonged, harsher version of that isolation. Not death, something that left you alive and broken. Later, by a lake where a row of cars lined the shore and people had built bonfires, David, Chloe, Pietro, and a few others sat around a roaring grill. It was a noisy holiday barbecue, the smell of charred meat and fat, laughter, and the clink of bottles. "David, Clark, what's wrong with you two?" Chloe asked, bundled in a down jacket, genuinely puzzled. "You haven't spoken to each other for days, have you?" "The atmosphere between you two is as chilly as this lakeside," Pietro chimed in, shivering exaggeratedly and rubbing his arms. He grinned at them, making a show of teeth chattering to lighten the mood. "Is there battle in the family? Someone sent us marshmallows and a treaty." Clark flipped a strip of beef and grunted. "I don't feel cold." His voice was muffled. The answer clipped. David lifted his cold beer and took a long pull, staring out across the water as if he hadn't heard. Chloe leaned forward, curiosity written all over her face. She'd never seen the brothers like this, so distant, so deliberately shut off from one another. What had happened between them? Chapter 27, A Strange New Transfer Student. It was still spring, and even by the cold river, a group of high school students couldn't contain their enthusiasm for a holiday barbecue. Template fusion, 93%. David took a sip of fruit beer and stared out at the icy water. A few days ago, after he'd left Tina in a coma, he and Clark had gone home. Their father, Jonathan, had stood in the doorway with a shotgun in his hands, eyes full of worry until he saw both his sons come back. Only then did he let out a long breath and scold David about why he'd chased the girl in the first place. To keep their parents from worrying, Clark had claimed he knocked Tina out and left her at the town police station. The police later found a transfer of $100,000 in Tina's school locker. With no clear evidence and Tina inexplicably comatose, she was being held as a suspect in the hospital. Clark had been uncharacteristically angry with David since that day and hadn't spoken to him for several days. David hated that Clark had taken the blame again, but he told himself it wasn't the end of the world. The son of Krypton, who now insists he won't cross that line, will one day personally snap the neck of his last remaining kin, David thought, grim and unrepentant. Clark wasn't stubborn for the sake of being stubborn. He was young and idealistic, idealizing the world and his place in it. By the bonfire, David clenched his fist. The muscles under his skin tightened like high-density alloy. A volcanic surge of power rolled through him. The Thanos Template had given him terrifying strength, but even that felt insufficient. Even a fully powered Superman had faced life-or-death situations more times than anyone could count in this dangerous world. Earth had narrowly escaped destruction more than once, and had even been destroyed on at least one occasion. David looked up, as if he could see beyond the blue sky into the universe itself. He had fused with the Thanos Template, but he had no designs to conquer the cosmos and no illusion of taking responsibility for everyone's safety. He had one simple, stubborn goal: get stronger so that no matter what happened, he could protect himself and his family. Simple to state, complicated to achieve. He planned to grab every opportunity to gain emotional points. "I hope the next template's at least as strong as Thanos," he muttered, taking another sip. Because recent events were so extreme and Clark's strength was growing with age, the emotional points they were generating had shot up. Template fusion was happening fast. The next template couldn't be far off. If only it offered powers that weren't tied to his body. That way, if something like the Tina incident happened again, he wouldn't have to hide it from his parents and let them worry. A ripple of commotion broke through the chatter. A girl walked into the clearing like a shaft of silver moonlight, vital, composed, and arresting. The rest of the world faded for a moment. All the boys' gazes snapped to her. Holding their skewers and stakes, they rose like bees to a flower, vying to invite her to join them. A couple nearly came to blows over it. The girl smiled politely and declined every invitation with calm confidence. The four in David's circle all noticed her. "Who is she? She looks like Lana," Clark asked, puzzled. He didn't recognize her. "That's your excuse for finding someone new before you've even moved on?" David said flatly. "She does look like her," Clark insisted, sulky. "I don't see it," Chloe said, a little awkwardly. "Besides the black hair, their faces and mannerisms aren't the same." "She's a new transfer to the high school," someone added. "Her name's Kira." Pietro stared at Kira as if struck dumb. "Perhaps my youth officially begins today," he declared. "Judging by her vibe, like some jungle explorer, she probably wouldn't want a man who's shorter than her," another smirked. Chloe, sitting alone at the edge of the party, watched Kira, the center of attention, with a little melancholy. Pietro, his most fatal flaw mentioned aloud, bristled and called himself a late bloomer. The tall girl seemed to glance toward their group, and Pietro brightened. He straightened his posture, cleared his throat, and tried to adopt a brooding, mysterious air while flipping meat on the grill, hoping some different approach might attract her. A few seconds later, when he looked again, Kira was already laughing with a group of girls and starting their own barbecue, apparently oblivious to them. Pietro deflated like a punctured balloon. From Kira, curiosity 0.404, doubt +03, friendliness +0, vigilance 0.02. David paused mid-sip, narrowing his eyes. "A metahuman?" he murmured. It wasn't unheard of in a small town, but her emotional reaction puzzled him. Friendly, then vigilant. How could she be both? The shifts were contradictory and weird. Unlike the others, Clark wasn't watching Kira. He was watching Lana and Whitney out by a rock, Whitney leaning against Lana as Lana, expression flat and distant, grilled meat. Whitney talked at her, and Lana only replied sometimes. There was sadness under her calm. They still sat together, which spoke louder than any words. Ex-lovers can still cling to old habits. Clark had been angry for days, but not constantly furious. If he really were enraged all the time, he wouldn't have been so careful to hide the cold. When Chloe and Pietro teased him and David, he'd have broken. He wasn't like that. The meat sizzled on the grill. Clark flipped a piece absent-mindedly and stole a glance at David. Tina had been left a vegetable by his brother. Clark had every right to be angry. But when Tina took on Martha's, his mother's appearance, a flash of uncontrollable rage had surged through him. Remembering that Tina had wanted to kill their mother made it harder to feel sorry for her. More than anger, Clark was worried, for David and for himself. If he failed to get David back on the right path, would he be changed by David instead, slowly desensitized to ruthless choices? "Clark, don't just stand there watching," Pietro said, nudging him and winking. "Whitney's making a play over there. Are you going to sit like a coward?" "Aye." Clark's shyness showed. He couldn't bring himself to compete with Whitney when Whitney was around. Pietro shook his head in secret. "Lana's been volunteering at the elderly care home these past 2 weeks," David said suddenly. "Tomorrow's the weekend, and Whitney's got football practice," Chloe added. Then David turned to Clark. "Have you finished your 30 hours of community service?" The school required 30 hours each semester to encourage giving back. Clark's face lit up. This was an opening. Thanks, David, he said, a little embarrassed. His older brother had always been the one to take the blame. David had a knack for seeing practical angles. No problem. David took another sip. Think about it. You've taken the blame for me twice already. You've been a good older brother. I should give you something back. Clark managed a small, grateful smile. Okay. Chloe watched them, curious. What blame? She asked from the side. When Chloe asked, Clark gave a vague shrug. Perfect. We can go together. Pietro suggested they all go as a group, then grinned. Too bad it's not summer, then we could be lifeguards at the pool. He was joking about not wanting to be around old people with dentures, but with spring still chillier than warm, indoor volunteer work sounded better than cleaning streets. Chloe had already finished her required community service hours and declined. I'm done with mine. She's not just watching me, David remarked after a moment. She's watching Clark, too. Kira had been chatting and manning the barbecue with a few other girls, but her glance kept drifting over to their group. David was watching her watch them. It felt like a small game of surveillance. What's her angle? Before anyone could answer, a member of the football team, short, thick golden hair, still in his uniform, strolled over and leaned against the picnic table. He was the kind of easy-smiling, practiced flirt that made people both annoyed and embarrassed. Chloe, you look freezing. Want some warming up? He said in a tone that tried for charm. Chloe flushed. Don't get the wrong idea. I have a blanket. Want to share? Sean raised an eyebrow and pointed to the empty spot next to her. Pietro stood up, only a head shorter than Sean, and didn't flinch at the challenge. David had heard Sean's type, slick, smooth talker, always breaking things off right after. For biology, the teacher paired me with Jane from the next class, Sean said, skating from brag to flirt. Chloe, who wrote for the school paper and knew Sean's reputation, laughed. I heard you dumped her last week. Sean waved it off. We both decided it was best. Seeing Chloe smile, he leaned in with practiced earnestness. Come sit with me. I won't do anything, no matter how gorgeous you are. Chloe's face went pink. It wasn't often she got compliments like that, and she glanced at Pietro, the one who teased her earlier about Kira, and opened her mouth to protest. Chloe, you haven't had a drink. You're just warming by the fire. You can't be lightheaded from that, David interrupted suddenly. Teenagers leap into things without thinking sometimes. Back off. He looked Sean in the eye and said the 3 words that ended the approach. Sean blinked, and the bravado faltered. He'd heard about David handling troublemakers before. It made him step back. All right, he said, palms up, and slunk away toward a group calling him over for a game by the lake. Once Sean had gone, Chloe tried to salvage some dignity for her friends watching. I wasn't being stupid. I was just getting rid of him. David shrugged. Let's pretend that's what happened. Chloe felt both embarrassed and grateful. Pietro and David had been trying to protect her. She knew it and thanked them quietly. Clark watched, a question tugging at him. He felt the edge between protecting friends and being needlessly cruel. His family only ever got his fiercest wrath when threatened and his warmest care when helped. Was he wondered, slipping toward treating others that way too? He shrugged off the thought as if it were a fly. He couldn't think about it now. He'd be swept up in his brother's influence if he let himself dwell. They heard someone shout from the far side of the lake. Pizza's here! Sean, catch! A football sent a pass toward Sean as a joke. He leapt but only brushed it. The ball sailed across the frozen surface and landed about 20 feet out. While everyone trooped off to grab pizza, Sean stalked out onto the ice to retrieve the ball. He hadn't taken more than a step when he felt the cold give beneath him. Crack, crack. The ice split. Sean froze, then slid, then the ice gave way, and he plunged through into the frigid water. He fought, thrashing to where he'd been standing, but the surface sealed over again and held him beneath. He stopped moving after a frantic, drowning minute and sank. At the muddy bottom of the lake, an odd, dim green light pooled around a cluster of meteorites settled in the silt. The cold water and the strange stones made something happen inside him. His veins seemed to darken, a green tint creeping into the skin that remained visible. Whatever change was starting, it was quiet and deliberate. Back on shore, the pizza was hot, and the boys were eating. No one noticed Sean missing. Early the next morning, Martha and Jonathan were hunched over a ledger and a calculator, running the numbers from the last 6 months. Distributor takes 12.5, 6 months of feed costs are 5%, then mortgage is 8.2, plus the mulcher repair. Martha muttered. $54,501, Jonathan concluded. Clark listened for a beat and had the same number in his head before the calculator stopped. He winced when Martha mentioned the mulcher repair. If I hadn't stuck my hand in the mulcher that day, we could have saved thousands. Martha's laugh was soft. At least we didn't lose money overall. She closed the ledger and looked at her 2 sons with the affection of a mother, proud of the way they'd grown up smart and sensible. Our real treasure is you two, not the numbers. Jonathan waved them out the door. You and Pietro set to do your community work today? Go on, don't worry about the farm. This shouldn't fall to students. They reported to the town nursing home where a voice over the intercom announced assignments. Room 206 needs an attendant. Please report to room 206. Every student was required to complete 30 community service hours. David, Clark, and Pietro had come together and collected their slips. A black-haired attendant in a magenta tunic pushed a cart stacked with books past them in the hallway. Hi, Lana. Small world, huh? Clark forced a casual wave, a little nervous glancing at the name tag. You're volunteering here too? For a while, Lana said with a friendly smile. Who's with you? What tasks did you get? I need to accompany Cassandra and read with her, Clark answered. David and Pietro were quiet, which gave him the opening to talk. Read with Cassandra? Lana chuckled. She's interesting. How so? Clark asked. The staff joke that she can see the future, Lana said, shrugging. From small things that happen in a minute to, well, bigger parts of a person's life. Have you ever tried it? Clark pressed. Lana only shook her head. She didn't believe it, it seemed, and pushed her cart down the hall. At the door to room 206, a small woman with white hair, folded over a braille book, looked up. She wore dark glasses, and her face was the kind you wanted in a grandmother. Come in. Don't stand there. It's the first time 3 young people have come to read with me. Please, come in. The old woman's voice was plain, but patient. She paused, then said, as if reading from a list, Pietro Ross. Pietro looked surprised. How? My eyes may be blind, the woman said, but my ears are not deaf. She removed her shades for a moment, the book sliding from her lap. Pietro stepped forward automatically and helped pick it up, his hand brushing the old woman's. What is your name, sir? She asked gently. He told her and then frowned when she went on. Mr. Ross, your trip home today will be long. Check your pockets. He patted them, and his face dropped. His car keys were not there. He searched his bag. They were gone. I won't be able to do my volunteer work today. Sorry. You two take care. There was resigned annoyance in his smile as he left, but he didn't argue with what she had said. After Pietro was gone, the old woman rose a little and turned toward the 2 brothers. She certainly did not look blind as she faced them squarely, and the kindness in her smile did not waver. Are you 2 brothers? What are your names? Gentlemen, Chapter 29. Live an honest life from now on. Luther, under a bright sun by the peaceful lake near the woods. Only the aftermath of last night's party remained. Then, with a crack, a hand burst through the thick ice, like a zombie's fist tearing out of the earth in some terrible legend. The skin was an icy blue, corpse pale from a night frozen in the lake. A figure hauled himself onto the bank, soaked and trembling. He looked like anyone who'd fallen through ice and clawed out, except for one strange fact. He had been lying in that lake all night. Sean sat shivering on the ground, icicles clinging to his eyebrows, and fumbled a discarded lighter to spark a fire. He stretched his numb hands toward the tiny flame. But the heat was sucked away through the air as if some invisible chill devoured it. The freshly lit kindling turned to a mound of ice. The extreme cold that had been bleaching his skin faded, and the blue drained from his fingers. Slowly, as if stepping back from death, Sean stared at his hands in disbelief. His mind, still foggy from the cold, began to clear. Something impossible had happened. He clenched his fists and felt a terrifying new strength. He stood, intending to go home. The instant he left the shelter of the trees, the cold rushed back. Icicles formed again on his brow. He flagged down a passing car. Kid, what's wrong with you? The driver asked, stopping and stepping out to help. The man reached to lift Sean. The warmth flowed from like a receding tide. His body stiffened, turned to a glassy ice sculpture, and collapsed onto the asphalt, shattering into a heap of bloody shards. As the cold in Sean's body eased, his power swelled. He lifted the car as if it were a toy. His eyes locked onto a direction in the town with the hungry focus of a prospector who just found the first flake of gold and now saw a mountain of it. His pupils dilated with excitement and lust. There it was, a thermal power station. Crackle. Thick wool curtains were drawn against the sunlight. The fire burned low in the hearth. Lex Luthor took a slow sip of whiskey. The burn slid down his throat without changing the impassive expression on his face. He clicked through old news articles and neighborhood forum posts on his computer, the ritual of work. A neat stack of US dollars lay on the table nearby. The door opened, and a man in a trench coat stepped in, middle-aged, hair thinning at the temples, eyes sharp and practiced. He tapped a brown paper file against his thigh as he approached. "Mr. Luthor, the money I asked for. Did you bring it?" "Roger Nixon, if I'm not mistaken." Lex rose quietly, poured a glass of amber liquor, and handed it over with a smile. "A reporter from the Metropolis Inquiry. You said you had something to show me. This photo sent our sales through the roof." Nixon flipped the file open and produced a newspaper. The front and center photo showed Lex Luthor at a bank entrance, a handgun in hand, caught mid-robbery. "That was then," Lex said, a low chuckle escaping him. "I suppose you, as a reporter, know the follow-up." "News ages fast," Nixon replied. "Hard to stay on top forever." He leaned forward, eyes bright. "Mr. Luthor, have you ever dug for potatoes?" Luthor raised an eyebrow. Before he could answer, Nixon smiled as if he'd proved his point. "A young man born with a silver spoon might not know, but when you dig for potatoes, you often unearth more than one." He tapped the file. "This is thick, nearly a wad of cash in its own right. Juvenile records, petty crimes, astonishing stuff." Luthor took the documents, thumbed through them, and smiled without mirth. "Thanks for the effort, Mr. Nixon." "Thank you?" Nixon blinked. "Payback? Blackmail?" He was unsure. "These are supposedly destroyed records, sealed archives. How did you get them?" Nixon sank into the chair behind Luthor's desk and continued. "I imagine your father paid to bury these. I'm no billionaire, but a few bribes to a bored archive clerk aren't expensive. Imagine the effect if this ran, 'People love a redemption story with a twist. The heir who's been cleared was a delinquent after all.' Our circulation would spike. The Luthor Group's stock would twinge." Luthor watched him glance covetously at the $100,000 on the table and made no move. Calmly, he reached under the desk and drew out a black cloth bag. "This money is yours," he said. Nixon, surprised, shrugged and shoved the stacks into the bag. "You must be feeling pretty good." "It's nice to win against the famous Luthor father and son," Lex said, voice flat as he watched Nixon tuck the cash away. Nixon straightened, bag in hand, a smug bruise of triumph on his face. As he headed for the door, Lex's tone softened into a small, almost fatherly admonition. "What I gave you is the only copy. Live an honest life from now on, Mr. Nixon." Nixon paused, a grin still on his face, then turned back, his expression hardening. "If you walk out that door right now, I guarantee you'll disappear from this world." Lex set his glass down slowly, an almost invisible smile on his lips. "What are you going to do? Kill me over this sum?" Nixon's laugh was short and brittle. "You blackmailed a billionaire heir. Did you think I wouldn't be prepared? If I don't log in at the agreed time, an email goes automatically to several newspapers. Is $100,000 worth you silencing me?" "No," Lex said mildly. "You'll live well, but there will be no evidence that you ever did." Nixon's contempt flickered into confusion. "What are you talking about?" Lex kept his eyes on the screen as if the things he said were ordinary matters. "Driver's license, passport, bank accounts, even tax records, erased. One call, and there's no proof you ever existed. Mr. Luthor, are you trying to scare me?" Nixon fished his phone out and tried several numbers, but the call wouldn't go through. Cold sweat sprung under his collar. His voice rose into a panicked edge. "How did you do that?" "Don't worry, Mr. Jack." In the manor office, Mr. Luthor leaned forward, fingers interlaced, hunched like some prehistoric predator baring its teeth. He sneered. "A wonderful new life awaits you." My name is Nixon, he said. That's in the past. I'll give you a new identity. Your surname will be Jack. What should your first name be? Baker? Benson? Johnson? Luther sounded as casual as if he were choosing his lunch, spinning Nixon's future on a whim. Nixon felt as if he were falling down a dark shaft. A cold dread ran through him. What profession? Assassin, drug dealer, gang enforcer, terrorist? Every one of those labels meant murder charges and a life on the run. He swallowed hard and shoved the bag of money onto the table. Family, work, friends, he couldn't let the first half of his life be tossed away. I can give you the money back. Luther raised an eyebrow. Nixon's hands trembled as he pulled the bills out and stacked them neatly again. He wiped cold sweat from his forehead and forced a strained, ugly smile at the man who seemed to hold his fate like a switch. Mr. Luther? You think you can blackmail me? You think I'm some rich kid who needs his father to save him? Luther rose slowly, his face hardening into something vengeful. His voice climbed, and Nixon wavered on his feet as though about to fall to his knees. You're not the first to try this. Those I've made disappear, never come back. What kind of people do you think run this country? Mr. Luther, what do you want from me? Nixon's voice shook as if he were facing a crushing wave. Luther's tone grew cold and precise. You're a leader among Metropolis reporters. Your contacts in the lower tiers are even better than mine. I want you to investigate something for me, quietly. You? Tell me. There's a family in this town named Kent. They run a farm. Luther pulled the curtains aside. Daylight flooded the room but couldn't touch the gloom in his eyes. I want everything on them. Every scrap of information, no matter how small. I will. Nixon answered too quickly, eager to placate him. I'll handle it. And what, Mr. Luther? Nixon lowered his head like a servile subordinate when Luther glanced at him. This town. Luther's lips curved into a small, savoring smile as he looked back out at the estate. Although I've only been here a few days, I've glimpsed its mysteries. They've fascinated me. He listed the things that had already sown doubt in him. Clark, hit by a sports car, doing 200 miles an hour, and thrown from a bridge, yet somehow unhurt. A high school girl who could imitate others' faces to rob a bank. The strange stories circulating online. I want to know everything about this town's secrets. You'll get it, Mr. Luther, Nixon said, swallowing the panic rising in his chest. Luther watched the reporter, his new subordinate, leave, then took a slow sip of wine and chuckled softly. Thank you, Nixon. Good thing someone timid and foolish like you found my loophole first, instead of a more troublesome fellow. You arrived just when I needed someone. What are your names, gentlemen? In the nursing home, an elderly woman with cataracts and white hair smiled kindly. I'm Cassandra. Clark. David Kent. Clark said his name first. David followed. The Kent brothers? Come closer. Cassandra pointed to the bed nearby. I hear you can foresee the future? The two brothers sat. Clark glanced at David. After encountering several ability users in town, he shared their private, guarded hope. He hesitated, then asked, Is it true? Who wouldn't be curious about the future, especially when the sightings had seemed real? The first time it happened, I thought it was a curse, a hallucination. Whenever I touched someone, fragments of events would flash before my eyes, uncontrollable and jumbled. Cassandra smiled. Later I realized it was a gift, a compensation. Clark frowned. The old woman didn't seem to hide or lie about her power, spilling it casually to people she just met. Only a charlatan would parade such things. Yet what had happened with Pietro moments earlier proved something inexplicable was at work. David, calmer, put a gentle hand on his brother's shoulder. Stop thinking rude things, he murmured. Unlike Clark, David was fairly sure Cassandra could foresee things, and he said softly, I think when you reach Miss Cassandra's age, you'll be able to accept certain things. The old woman radiated a tranquil calm, as if time had smoothed every rough edge. Clark realized his suspicion had been disrespectful and quickly apologized. I'm sorry, Miss Cassandra. It's all right. Cassandra's smile was easy. When did you first have a vision? Clark had long suspected that the town's anomalies began after the meteor shower. Perhaps ability users were tied to the meteorites. He had the hunch, but no proof. One morning, a meteorite fell into the wheat field in front of my house. The doctor said the flash burned my optic nerve. That moment changed my life. Cassandra's face was gentle. I'm sorry. She thought he was apologizing for making her bring up her blindness. Kindness is a good thing. Seeing Clark's guilty look, David added, "Some things in this world are beyond your control, brother." He didn't choose to come here. He didn't choose the burden. David's words eased some of the weight on Clark's shoulders. Since then, I can't see the present clearly. I only glimpse the futures of others. Cassandra's voice was quiet, steady, and she slowly extended her hand. "Would you like to try, child?" Clark hesitated, wondering if using such an ability would sap his strength. He had come to volunteer, to read to the elderly, not to probe the future. Outside the room, a tall, dark-haired woman stood silently, leaning against the wall like a hunter waiting in the brush, listening to their conversation. Occasionally I catch a flash of light, but only in someone else's future. Cassandra's eyes, blind though they were, seemed to look inward. David mused aloud. "So that's why you help people, Miss Cassandra." "The world is beautiful," Cassandra said with nostalgia. "Clouds as white as cotton, green fields, a clear blue sky. Light is always better than darkness, especially for someone who once had sight." Moved by her calm, Clark stopped hesitating and reached out his hand to the kind blind woman. "Thank you, Miss Cassandra. The update is a bit late. I added an extra 400 or 500 words. Chapter 31, The Future. Clark reached out and touched the old woman's wrinkled hand. After a few seconds, his vision blurred. The world seemed to shift around him. An apocalyptic scene unfolded. A blood-red sunset choked the sky. Skyscrapers were pierced, houses collapsed, fires burned, and thick black smoke rose in pillars. People scattered and fled. The desperate wails of thousands cut through the air like something from hell. A deep, terrible ravine, as if gouged by a colossal hand, ran through the landscape. Clark felt a searing pain as if struck by a meteor and found himself lying at the edge of that gully, his body flailing, struggling to look up. Then a figure descended from the sky. A black-haired man in a dark battlesuit patterned with strange gold markings drifted down. Half a meter above the ground, gravel rose and circled him, orbiting like a small satellite. His presence was overwhelming, like a god descending, and the air itself seemed harder to breathe. "David?" Clark's voice was a whisper in his own head. He was stunned. The man was unfamiliar, and yet unmistakably his younger brother. For a moment, Clark felt as if he were trapped inside a dream, a helpless spectator, limited to watching with no control, no voice. "Clark, look around." The black-haired David's eyes held a lava-like red glow as he shook his head slightly. "I didn't want to do this, but you're too disobedient. You forced my hand." "What do you mean?" Clark's mind raced. Was all this David's doing? Had he given in to some terrible power and torn the city apart? In the distance, the Daily Planet building lay battered. The golden globe on its roof had toppled, smashing through several towers before landing among the ruins. "Is this Metropolis?" Clark thought, horror rising in his chest. If this was David's doing, did it mean that his brother had turned to darkness and Clark had opposed him? A wave of fury surged from the man who must be his future self. His eyes flamed like erupting volcanoes. "Brother, you need to be corrected." With a cold, thunderous roar, the future Clark launched himself into the air and struck toward David, a god attacking an enemy. A streak of golden rope snapped out like lightning and lassoed David's waist. At the same time, green chains that looked like crystal snakes coiled around him, huge spikes hammered into the ground, pinning the chains. David's charge was abruptly halted. He was yanked back. Their faces were inches apart as David hovered, unblinking. "It's you who needs fixing, my brother." Clark looked around, searching for who had assisted David. The future Clark snapped his head, furious. A striking figure, female, crowned, wearing an armored battle skirt, stomped the ground and gripped the golden rope. On the other side, a brown-haired man in a glowing green suit hovered, his usual easy smile gone. A ring on his hand pulsed as he strained to keep the crystal chains and spikes intact. Both of them were hurting, teeth clenched, pouring everything into holding back the furious future Clark. David's helpers? Clark's heartbeat quickened. Were they aiding him or fighting him? Before he could frame more questions, David blurred forward and struck. The future Clark slammed into the earth like a meteor, carving a crater dozens of meters across. The shockwave rolled down half a dozen streets like an earthquake. Buildings shuddered, glass shattered in a glittering rain. From the smoky rooftops came a new sound, the snap of a grappling hook. A shadowed figure swung down, cape unfurling like a bat's wings, and landed with feline grace. He cut a dark silhouette against the ruined skyline, cold, unreadable, emanating an oppressive presence like the eternal clouds over Gotham. Clark had doubted the reality of what he was seeing, had wondered if his brother could truly go so far, but now his certainty wavered. The bat-like figure gave the scene another layer of dread. If this man was part of the future, what did that mean for everything else? David frowned, glancing at the newcomer's arrival, as if acknowledging how the scene would cruelly be seen. Clark, if our parents saw this, they'd be so sad. Then suddenly, the vision shattered. Clark's consciousness snapped back. He blinked and found himself staring up into the old woman's pale face. Miss Cassandra's eyes were open. The glimpse had ended. Cassandra looked at David with a shocked, bewildered expression. She had been reading Clark's future, but why was she staring at David that way? Had she seen the black-suited figure too? "David, you," Clark began, but the words choked off. He pushed to his feet, still reeling. Outside the ruined tableau, the world settled back into the present, but the echo of what he'd seen hung in his ears. Somewhere else, in the cold hush of a power plant yard, a different scene played out. A massive smokestack, dozens of meters tall, stood rimed in frost. A man named Sean withdrew his hand from the ice with an exhilarated grin. Around his feet lay a dozen factory workers frozen into horrifying ice sculptures, their faces forever caught in terror. Frost crawled and retreated across the chimney's surface as Sean absorbed heat, each surge of power advancing him another notch. When he finally stopped, he felt almost invincible. He glanced at a scattering of dented brass bullets on the ground, shots that hadn't even left a scratch on him. Nearby, a patrolman's crowbar lay twisted. Sean picked it up. With a terrible creak, the crowbar bent and folded under his grip, steel warping like mud. He pressed his fingers into the warped metal until it oozed between them. Wild joy lit his face, and he laughed, a sound thick with triumph. "Not even the limit yet," he murmured, flesh tingling with newfound strength. Civilization was built on steel. What could stand against him now? The police would be nothing. This whole town could be his to rule. A memory cut through his glee. David's face from yesterday, the way the other man's single look had driven him away. Fury replaced elation. He had been humiliated then. He would not be again. He left the frozen yard, boots crunching on frost, and headed toward the Kent farm with a hard set to his jaw. "I promise," he whispered into the cold, "you'll regret treating me that way, David." Chapter 32. People Who Can't See the Future. "What's wrong with me?" David stared at the two people in the room, both visibly stunned, and asked Clark, bewildered, "What did you see?" Cassandra, who'd never seen David's ability before, could be excused for not understanding. But Clark's expression, equal parts shock and fear, was a mystery. Clark hesitated, a battle playing out across his face. Should he tell his brother? What would David do if he learned what Clark had glimpsed? A warning hammered in his mind. He absolutely mustn't become like that future version of himself, give in to it, and slide into darkness. "You saw it too, child?" At Clark's voice, the blind Cassandra turned toward him, surprised. Shouldn't I have seen it?" "No one has ever seen it before." Cassandra shook her head. When she activated her power to foresee other people's futures, only she herself would receive the vision. Like Mr. Ross, when he lost his keys earlier, I had to tell him what I had seen. But this time was different. Why? We all know you're different from others. Clark, who had been nearly speechless after what he'd just witnessed and had forgotten everything else, suddenly remembered in a rush that his own abilities had been exposed, and that his brother was different too. "Don't be afraid, Clark." Hearing Cassandra describe the face she had seen in the vision, her voice was gentle and she smiled. "I realized I've seen you before." "You've seen me before?" Clark was puzzled. Cassandra had gone blind when he was still an infant, arriving here with a meteor shower. David's expression shifted subtly as he realized where Cassandra might have seen him. Cassandra paused, smiled enigmatically, and then said, "Child, go close the door." Clark walked to the door, puzzled. Near the wall by the door, a dark-haired figure slipped away when she heard voices. The figure, Pietro, had left the door slightly ajar when he left. Clark shut it, then returned to the bedside but didn't sit beside his brother. Why are you looking at me like that, Clark? David, watching the complex emotions on Clark's face, feigned nonchalance. Concern plus 32, panic plus 30, fear plus 25. He wasn't particularly interested in knowing the future, he never had been, but Clark's reaction made him curious. Clark's current mood. It's like an extreme version of his old worry that I might go bad, isn't it? David's eyes flicked, trying to reconstruct what Clark had seen. How could his future turn into whatever Clark feared? Around the corner, the dark-haired girl, Kira, lingered, glancing at the door. She looked like she was about to slip away quietly. Kira? A voice behind Kira chimed in. What a coincidence. I didn't expect to run into you here. Lana passed by with a cart, surprised to see the same girl she'd briefly met at the party the night before. You volunteering too? Kira turned, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Yes. Some things are the same even if you're new. 30 hours of community service per semester. Lana chatted easily. Kira was talkative, asking questions about the small-town high school and requesting introductions to well-known students to get a feel for the place, but she seemed distracted. Her gaze kept drifting toward the closed door. Back at the bedside, Cassandra continued, smiling. In other people's futures, I see pain and despair, but when you appear, hope descends and disasters fade away. David's eyes widened. So this old woman had glimpsed the future Clark, the man people might come to call Superman, long ago, maybe not in his personal future, but in the futures of others. He'd underestimated her. If she could see that figure, she might be tapping into threads of the future he himself hadn't mapped out. Me? Extraordinary? Clark pointed to himself, stunned. He'd always known he was different, but never imagined being described like that. You seem born for this, child, to help others out of fear and darkness. Cassandra's tone was soft, and her words carried weight. After seeing so many people's futures, she'd distilled a rule. Do you know what it is? Please tell me, Clark said respectfully, regaining his composure despite the shock. She smiled with a touch of mystery. The future can be changed. A little shrug. In fact, from this moment on, the future begins changing. Like Pietro, David murmured. Once someone knows where they're headed, they can't help but steer away from an outcome they dislike. Yes, child. Cassandra addressed David now, impersonal kindness in her voice, even though in her visions he might have stood opposed to Clark. She had seen countless possible lives. People were too complicated to be boxed into a single fate. A quiet farm boy could one day become the planet's most beloved figure. A respected prosecutor could fall after one terrible bad day. A cold mercenary could, without reward, become the person who saves the world. Now, it's your turn. Cassandra reached out a hand toward David. He hesitated, then took it. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3. Time stretched, and nothing happened. David began to think he wasn't as special as the son of tomorrow, and that she simply couldn't see his future. Special Kent brothers. Cassandra's blind eyes, clouded white, opened to him, and she sighed. Child, I cannot see your future. The answer stunned him. This had never happened before. I cannot give you guidance, she added. Your future must be grasped and created by you. Clark, a little stunned, and with the iron resolve that the vision had sparked, bit back his fear. Madam, could you look again? Please, look at my future one more time. Cassandra shook her head, a hint of helpless patience in her smile. I'm not a radio you can tune at will, changing channels whenever you please. My sight doesn't switch back and forth on demand. She paused, as if apologizing for something that only she could perceive. The update was a little delayed this time. It added a few extra moments to the vision. But that is enough. Keep living and shape your path yourselves. Chapter 33. Ignorance Leads to the Grave. Miss Cassandra's visions of the future were unreliable. Sometimes she saw events just minutes away. Other times, she glimpsed the end of a life. She couldn't lock on to a single person's constantly shifting future. Clark wanted her to read him again, to see if his determination to stop his brother from going astray had changed anything, but that wasn't possible. I'm tired, children, she said. The clock ticked. Cassandra smiled contentedly. Clark felt a little guilty. He hadn't even asked for a proper reading. David patted the old woman's shoulder and rose to leave. She was blind and read Braille. What she needed was someone to let her see the vibrant world again through their futures. Miss, sorry for the interruption. Clark checked the clock. felt he'd kept her too long, and bade farewell. "I'll come by this afternoon. I can only show fragments, Miss Blonde," Cassandra warned as he reached the door. "Sometimes you don't see the whole picture, so don't judge hastily. And, when it comes to family, have more patience and trust." "I understand. Thank you, Miss Cassandra." Clark hesitated, then nodded thoughtfully and closed the door. He'd planned to accompany David downstairs to play chess with another resident as part of their community service. After 2 games, the woman had realized David was letting her win and refused to continue. When she forced him into one serious match, she was quickly defeated. Playing against someone so much stronger was no fun, especially for the weaker player. "You two go on. I'll tell staff you played with me," she had said, rubbing her forehead in frustration. They left. Lunchtime was approaching, and both of them preferred Martha's seafood chowder at home to the nursing home's cafeteria. Down at the lot, they saw Pietro's family car parked, but Pietro himself was nowhere in sight, probably still hunting for his keys. Clark walked out with a clouded brow, distracted. David grinned. "What did you see in the future that's got you so worried? Did I lock you in a kryptonite coffin? Or steal Lana, your heart's desire?" "No, nothing. Even a child wouldn't buy that." David laughed, slightly exasperated at Clark's lousy poker face. "Let me think about whether I should tell you, Clark." Clark didn't know whether revealing what he'd been shown would help or harm, so he decided to wait. He cast a last look back at the nursing home. He had meant to spend time with Lana, maybe talk with her in the cafeteria, but whatever he'd seen had taken the mood away. "It's your future anyway," David added with a shrug. He wasn't going to be haunted by every stray prediction. The future was under his feet and in his hands. He steered his own life. "The direction of your ship is up to you." But David's mind was elsewhere. Since the template fusion had reached over 90%, a powerful energy had been building inside him, filling every cell. The more the fusion increased, the stronger that energy grew, yet he couldn't release it. He thought of Thanos from the comics. The comic book Thanos could project cosmic energy from his hands or eyes, but not at first. After leaving Titan and rising to power, Thanos had killed a pirate leader, taken command, and looted the galaxy for tech to modify his body. To access his full potential, he created armor and underwent biological modifications that let him focus and discharge the energy within. Thanos' golden armor in the comics looked crude but hid top-tier cosmic tech. One function was helping him concentrate and release energy. David wondered whether he should have merged with the movie Thanos Template. Some essences didn't change. Movie Thanos had been obsessed with the Infinity Stones and population control. Maybe that pursuit left little room to explore internal potential. Even without energy beams, Thanos' physique made him a force. And even with beams, those Infinity Stones made the snapping trivial. David had no suit of cosmic high-tech armor to channel his energy, no way to perform biology-altering surgery. For now, the extra ability felt useless. He raised an eyebrow and glanced up. "What a coincidence, David." A voice threaded with resentment and triumph cut across the street. A figure stepped from the crossroads and blocked their path. His skin looked like ice and snow, his lips a purple blue, his face had a vaguely sinister cast. "I was on my way to your family's farm, didn't expect to run into you." "Sean?" Clark asked, surprised by the abnormal coloring and the way his body seemed to tremble. "Are you all right?" "All right?" Sean spread his arms and laughed wildly. "I've never been better." Suddenly his expression hardened and he turned toward David. Frost crept along the grass at his fingertips. The wind whipped up ice and snow. "Kneel and beg me, and I might spare your life, David." David's lips curled in contempt. "Have you considered joining a circus?" he said. Sean snapped. "Your ignorance will lead you to the grave." He leaped and threw a punch. "You have no idea what power I possess now." "Sean, stop!" Clark lunged to block him, trying to protect David. The instant his hands touched Sean, heat from Clark's body was drawn out uncontrollably. A sunlight glow flared where they made contact and funneled into Sean's chest. "How can the heat in your body be more immense than a small power plant?" Sean gasped, his voice full of disbelief as his muscles swelled and his features sharpened. "I'm getting stronger." The Shadow of Fire and White. Chapter 34. Don't go near those brothers. "Ah!" A pained whimper escaped Clark as his strength drained away. He collapsed to the ground, his skin coated in ice cold enough to crack steel. Consciousness blurred, he shivered uncontrollably. "You're courting death." David stamped the ground, cracking the asphalt, and shot forward like a cannon, appearing in front of Sean. With the force of a volcanic eruption, he punched Sean in the chest. Bang! A deafening boom and a visible white shockwave burst outward like a hurricane, sweeping dozens of meters. Crack, crack, crack. Sean felt as if a 400-kilometer-an-hour train had punched his chest. Pain stabbed him. He was thrown backward, carving a deep trench and coming to rest dozens of meters away. "Clark, how's your body?" David asked quickly, frowning. Exposed to sunlight and still breathing, Clark's physique should have held. I'm fine," Clark managed. Under the sun, the purplish frost on Clark's face faded, but his body remained weak. Seeing his brother worried about him warmed something inside him. Clark suddenly remembered the vision. In it, his brother could fly, his skin normal and eyes glowing red. Was that really David? Had Cassandra's power misfired on an alien, giving Clark bizarre hallucinations? "Brother, don't kill him, and don't." Clark's teeth chattered from the cold. "I'm going to avenge you." Before he could finish, David stomped again. The asphalt cracked beneath him as he shot forward, drawing a long arc and radiating a chill that made the air tremble. He slammed down in front of Sean, mud and dirt flying up. "Ignorance leads people to the grave, but it won't be mine." "You gained abilities too?" Sean's voice was a flat, hateful roar as he scrambled to his feet. He lunged, swinging wildly. David tilted his head and easily dodged. After seeing Clark's condition, he knew better than to let the man touch his body. "You can absorb heat to grow stronger?" David asked. Sean charged like a football player, a blast of air sweeping with him, and threw himself at David, grabbing his waist. "Kneel and beg for mercy." He pushed with his legs while activating his power to drain David's heat. He expected David to collapse at the first contact. David braced, digging deep grooves with his legs, then, without hurry, punched Sean down. The force slammed Sean and David into the ground. Another white shockwave sent gravel and grass flying. Bones cracked and splintered. My back!" Sean howled from the pit he had carved for himself, agony twisting his face as he clawed at his spine. He couldn't feel his lower body. "Don't worry, you'll be free from this pain soon," David said flatly. He had felt a slight pull on his universal energy, but knocked Sean down with the crushing force of a falling mountain. Bang! Sean's eyes rolled back and he blacked out. With his brain damaged, he would slip into a darkness he might never escape. A shaky Clark stumbled over just in time to see Sean go limp. "Oh, right, Clark. What were you trying to say just now?" David withdrew his fist, tilting his head from the rim of the pit. Clark started, furious and helpless at the sight of Sean reduced to a vegetable. Creak. The door opened. Kira, hair black, hands folded, a nervous crease between her brows, stepped into the room. "Miss Cassandra, sorry to intrude," she said. Cassandra sat on a stool, eating slowly, listening to the clear bird song from the branches outside the window. Her eyes were closed as she savored each bite, the expression on her face a calm, almost otherworldly serenity. She might have been tasting the most exquisite thing in the world, or reminiscing over life's final aftertaste. "Child, I am not an old gypsy witch." She opened her eyes, put down her spoon, and spoke without hurry. "If you want cracking forecasts of the future, you should visit a fortune teller's tent." Kira swallowed, desperate. "Please, Miss Cassandra, everyone at the care home says you can see the future. I need your help." Cassandra shook her head gently. "Eavesdropping is a poor habit," she said, then softened. "I won't reveal someone else's future without their permission, but I can look at yours." Kira's face lit up. This might be a way. If Nama truly reappeared this generation as prophesied, if the legends were true, and one of two brothers was Nama, the savior, while the other was Sagai, the destroyer, then Cassandra's vision could point her to which was which. She stepped closer. Even without changing form, her eagerness seemed to sharpen her senses beyond what a blind old woman should hear. "Please, time is running out." "Time is running out?" Cassandra listened to the clock. Its minute hand was almost at the hour. A faint smile crossed her lips. "I saw my own death in the future of the other caregivers." Some futures can be altered. Others, like the natural end of life, cannot. Nearly 90, she had planned to leave quietly that morning. One last look at the world with the help of others. Death should be peaceful. Kara, holding her hands tightly, looked guilty. This matters not only to me, but to my tribe, and to the world, she pleaded. Cassandra lay back on the bed with Kira's help, smiling as she took the girl's hand. The effort drained her, but she wanted to help. After a vision, she opened her eyes weakly, pity and urgency mingling in her gaze. She turned toward the anxious girl. No, do not go near those brothers. If you approach them, your fate will be unfortunate. Unfortunate? Kira echoed. And your tribe? Cassandra's voice trailed off. The minute hand slipped past the hour. Mid-sentence, she lost strength. Her hand fell, and the life left her. Miss? Kira's face went ashen. Chapter 35. Aliens Are Human Too. David showed no mercy. He left Sean, a man who had tried to attack him and had even begged to be allowed to kill him, lying like a vegetable at the bottom of the pit. Clark, furious for his brother, lunged forward, knocked Sean away, and managed to save him. A confused warmth rose in his chest, mingled with anger. Looking down at the unconscious man, Clark's voice was heavy and uncertain. This isn't like the others. Jerome, Garrick, Tina, those people were murderers. Sean might have only just developed his power. You've already left him like that. David pretended to be surprised. His ability is dangerous. Putting everything else aside, shouldn't this be considered self-defense? He patted Clark on the shoulder and started to walk away. Don't be anxious, brother. Aliens, metahumans, are people too. Clark thought of the comic book version of this argument, Superman's constant refusal to see himself simply as a person, as if power alone removed one from moral scrutiny. If Sean had only attacked him and no one else, perhaps it wouldn't merit a heavy-handed response. But applying that reasoning to justify what had been done to Sean, was power a license to harm? Were metahumans above the law? Clark gritted his teeth. For a moment he acted with speed. He erased obvious traces around the pit and delivered Sean to the hospital entrance before catching up with David. The first time David had behaved like this, Clark had been shocked. Now, disturbingly, he was getting used to it. At home that evening, the edge of Clark's anger dulled. A radio report at the dinner table announced that the town's thermal power plant had been attacked, suspected use of liquid nitrogen, and that more than a dozen people had frozen to death. The authorities suspected an unknown assailant, possibly a metahuman. Jonathan and Martha warned them to be careful. Clark knew something they didn't. The man who had caused the town's trouble was currently a vegetable in the hospital. Thinking it through, Clark found himself less fearful of David than he had been of others like Sean, people who, the moment they gained power, elevated themselves above law. Still, Clark believed David needed correction. He told himself, quietly, it would be best if David didn't just put people out of commission at the drop of a hat. He had stopped trying to lecture. David had his own code for dealing with the world, and words alone wouldn't change him. Whether Miss Cassandra's prophecy had been right or wrong, Clark could not let David go down a darker path. That was his responsibility as an older brother. I was careless this time, he admitted inwardly. Next time, he resolved, he would stop David himself, no more letting his younger brother have to bail him out. That evening, they went to the Metropolis City Museum, where a special antiques exhibition was taking place. Guests in suits and evening dresses sipped complimentary champagne and admired rare objects brought from around the world. Clark stood before a glass case holding an ancient Greek breastplate and watched his reflection, the day's events heavy on his mind. 2 hours after we left the nursing home this afternoon, Miss Cassandra was gone, he said quietly. He had been grateful to the old woman for her prescience and had planned to return and spend more time with her, only to find an empty room. A red-eyed caregiver had told him she died at noon. She had helped many residents with their troubles. They were mourning. At least she didn't suffer, David said softly, shaking his head. Maybe she foresaw her own death and left peacefully. Earlier at the nursing home, they'd run into Lana. She had just come back from Metropolis and, remembering Clark's kindness to her, handed them each a ticket to the exhibition. Clark had been glad for the chance to spend time with Lana, but the day's violence made him wary. Trying to lift his spirits, Clark took a breath and studied the breastplate. It was inlaid with large blue and red gemstones, obviously ceremonial rather than functional. I heard some museums display high-quality replicas to avoid risking the real thing, he murmured. You can see it for yourself, David replied lightly. David wasn't a Greek antiquities expert either. He'd been half distracted by a private stream of information running through his head. An internal status readout he called the Thanos Template was nearly fully merged. He'd been ignoring the emotional notification alerts for days. Grievances and hatred from the people he'd crippled kept piling in, and it was annoying. But the important thing was that his emotional points were rising. A flicker of data crossed his mind. From Clark's resolve plus 38. Clark's strength had increased very quickly recently, he noted as he scrolled back through the alerts. The ability points Clark had contributed in recent days had nearly doubled. Even mild emotions produced measurable points. From Kira's nervousness, plus 0.7, he paused. When had Kira become nervous about him? Had they crossed paths today? Clark, David, I can't believe I ran into you two here. A smooth voice interrupted his thoughts. Lex Luthor stood nearby in a black suit, a glass of champagne with a lemon slice in his hand, smiling. Would you like a tour of these exhibits? Lex, Clark said, relieved to see a familiar face. Lex pointed to the breastplate. A genuine ancient Greek artifact. Rumor says it once belonged to Alexander the Great. The snake pattern on the chest stands for courage and strength, Lex said, nodding toward a coiled, S-shaped motif. David glanced at it and let out a short laugh. The coiling did resemble an S. I don't think Alexander's soldiers would have worn this into actual battle, he remarked. The gemstones were too conspicuous to be practical. If it wasn't for fighting, what did it symbolically defend? Lex smiled. Sometimes the enemy isn't on a blood-soaked battlefield. This armor was meant to make Alexander appear sacred, intimidating at ceremonial events. Lex, are you a history buff? Clark asked, surprised that the heir to a business empire knew so much about antiquity. I'm interested in those who seized the world before turning 30, Lex replied with cool ambition. David raised an eyebrow. If I recall correctly, Alexander died at 33. They continued chatting as the exhibition glittered around them. The conversation eased some of the weight of the day, but Clark's resolve remained. Next time, he'd act rather than argue. An hour later, there would be another chapter. Recommend a friend's book, easy and smooth with seasoned writing. A simplified cultivation novel, very well written. Interested readers can collect and read it. Chapter 36. Clark's abilities discovered. Lex's smile stiffened a little. Clark patted his shoulder and laughed to break the awkwardness. Lex, life isn't only meaningful if you rule the world. Across the room, he caught sight of Lana. A smile unconsciously spread across his face, and he started forward to greet her. Whitney was with Lana. The daytime football practice had just ended, and he had followed her, hoping to patch things up with his ex. Seeing them relaxed and chatting, Clark's expression darkened. Life still needs a bit of drive, don't you think, Clark? Lex said, patting his shoulder again. Only a man who dares to charge ahead can win a woman's favor. He gave the advice with a smile, trying to use the moment to get closer by coaching Clark on romance. And for all their differences, Lex genuinely felt a measure of gratitude for Clark's life-saving act the night before. Clark excused himself. I'm going out for some fresh air. Lana wore a pale pink dress, a green crystal pendant resting against her fair throat. Clark felt a tug in his chest. David gave a quiet shake of his head. Clark was making his own choices, and no one could tell him otherwise. Clark wandered through the museum, letting the pieces of ancient Egypt calm him. The artifacts weren't flashy like that gilded armor. They had a quiet, timeless charm. Not far away, in a park hedge, Jack Fran looked every inch the predator. He slammed a man to the ground and rained blows down on him. I can't find it. I don't know where the company's confidential client files are. Let me go, please, the man pleaded, blood at the corner of his mouth. If you won't work for me, you'll spend a few years inside, Fran snarled, flipping the man onto his back and snapping handcuffs open. Jack Fran trafficked in secrets, an investigator who operated in gray areas, who controlled people with what he knew about them. Being a cop was his cover. What he loved was the money. If there was profit to be made, he'd pursue it. Outside the museum, Clark breathed in the evening air and looked up at the jagged skyline. Compared to Smallville, Metropolis felt like another world, an enormous, humming city. He glanced down a deserted street and spotted a homeless man curled on a bench under a bus stop sign, a small dog huddled beside him. For a moment, Clark felt the same helplessness he sometimes felt in Smallville, as if the city's wealth and misery coexisted without meeting. A bus rounded the corner, screeching to the stop. The driver suddenly slumped over, pale, as if struck by a heart attack. The wheels swung wildly. The bus was headed straight for the shelter where the sleeping man lay. Oh no! Clark's reaction was instinctive. In a blink, he crossed the distance and put himself between the bus and the shelter, reaching up to stop the vehicle. His mind raced. The bus's mass would crush him. At best, he could save the homeless man and lose the driver. Then something impossible happened. A strange, translucent force seemed to spring from Clark's hands and body, wrapping the entire bus in an invisible shell. The speeding vehicle bucked as if it had hit a thick wall. It ground to an abrupt halt. Where Clark's hands met the bus, there was only a shallow dent. The homeless man was unhurt, the driver still breathing. Clark stared at his palms, bewildered. How had he done that? It made no scientific sense. In the bushes, Jack Fran had been in the middle of roughing up his victim when the sound of the commotion reached him. He looked up and watched the scene unfold, stunned. The driver's groans brought the moment back to life. Clark ripped open the bus door, lifted the stricken man into his arms, and vanished down the street toward Metropolis Hospital. Fran stared at the dented front of the bus, at the abandoned bench, and then at the spot where the driver had been. The street was empty. He had not imagined it. His pulse raced. Everyone has a secret, and this time Fran had stumbled onto one that might be enormous. The next morning, at the Kent breakfast table, Jonathan and Martha read the paper. Martha smiled despite the headline. The museum looked marvelous, she said. Clark shuffled down the stairs, hesitating. A small incident happened last night, Clark said quietly, and handed Jonathan the paper. Headline, Out of control late-night bus nearly runs over homeless man. I stopped it, Clark said simply. Martha's face went pale with worry, then softened. Are you all right, Clark? He shrugged. I'm fine, Ma. Clark, you saved a life. I'm very proud of you. Jonathan frowned as he read. Did anyone see you? It was late, Clark said. The main road was empty. Everyone was inside the museum. No witnesses were mentioned in the article. That's good, Martha said, relieved. Eat up and get to school. You'll miss the bus. David already knew what Clark hadn't yet fully accepted. After hearing Clark's account, he suspected a bioforce field had formed, the same kind of field that, in other legends, let a man defy gravity. Clark had manifested something new overnight and had been distracted all morning. At noon, when school let out, Clark tugged David's sleeve. He wanted to test the ability out in the woods outside town, to understand it and keep it from getting out of control. They cut through an alley on their way out of town when a middle-aged man stepped out and blocked them. He flashed a police badge and wore a smug smile like a hyena smelling carrion. Clark Kent, David Kent, right? He said. Metropolis Police Detective Jack Fran. There's been a traffic incident we'd like your help investigating. Traffic incident? Clark repeated, heart tightening. Jack Fran's smile widened. Something in his expression suggested he might already know more than he should. David narrowed his eyes. Chapter 37. Are you interested in taking a bet with me? In the alley, Detective Fran produced 2 photographs. They were stills from the museum's surveillance cameras. Clark and David standing with Luther. Fran shook the photos with a smile. You were hard to find, Clark. Lucky for me, you showed up at the museum that night. Clark only remembered the clothes, the haircut, half a profile. Finding someone from that would have been nearly impossible. The city was quiet that late. The only place still holding an event had been the Metropolis Museum. Fran had rolled the dice, and he'd found them. With these, it won't be difficult for me, as a police detective, to track the 2 of you down. Officer, what do you want us to cooperate on? Clark asked, swallowing nervously. A cop had sought him out alone, citing a traffic accident. Something about it felt off. David remained by his side, arms crossed and expression cold, watching the officer with wary interest. I don't know what your adoptive parents fed you, Fran said, eyes bright as if he were looking at a rare specimen. He reached out and squeezed Clark's arm. Clark flinched and slapped his hand away, alarmed, but Fran wore a triumphant grin. Careful, I couldn't handle being pushed like that. Officer, I honestly don't know what you're talking about, Clark protested. Save the act. I saw it last night. Fran leaned in conspiratorially, lowering his voice. A spectacular bit of theater, stopping an out-of-control city bus with one hand. Clark's expression stiffened. He opened his mouth to say something, but Fran cut him off. Clark, at this point, are you still going to play dumb? David's jaw tightened. Even the mildest beast, he said coldly, isn't something a person can provoke. Fran smirked. An elephant, huh? So you know about your brother's secret too. He turned his attention to Clark, but deliberately ignored David's veiled threat. Exposing Clark was his real aim. Intimidating David was just collateral. I know what you want, Fran said, gesturing to both of them. You've got this strength, yet you never join school sports. You never fight back. Your parents work that farm, barely scraping by. It's a pity to waste it. His voice turned silky. If you want a peaceful, stable life, I can help you get it, but I don't work for free. He tapped the photos. I have copies. If I don't hear back by a certain time, I've set an email to go out to every major outlet with everything I've got on your family. Imagine the fallout. You'd be the hottest story in Metropolis, and the scrutiny would be merciless. Clark's fingers found Fran's lapel. Enough, he snapped. Don't drag my brother or mom and dad into this. If anyone's listening, keep your voice down, Fran said with a laugh, putting a finger to Clark's lips as if shushing a child. The young man was scared and furious, the perfect combination to be manipulated. I'm not asking for much. I'm a righteous cop. All I want is for you to help me deal with a few notorious gangs we can't otherwise touch. Fran had read the file on Clark and thought he knew what would tempt him. Take down a few of Metropolis's biggest criminal operations, and the rewards would be enormous. Clark's face crumpled. I won't help you kill people. What about gangs with murder charges? Fran pressed. Then don't kill them. Subdue them. Clark's courage was harsh and urgent. He regretted how careless he'd been the night before, how he hadn't checked for witnesses before acting. It had been sudden. He hadn't had time to think. Fran shrugged. Money was all he cared about. That's acceptable. Subdue them. Don't kill. Easy. There was a pause, a hesitation. Just as Clark weighed the alternatives, a slow, deliberate clap sounded from the darkness. Bold, but cautious. David's voice was unhurried. He stepped forward, palms together in quiet approval. His face gave nothing away. Inside, his heart might have been pounding, but he looked as composed as a statue. Those are the traits of a good gambler. Fran's smile faltered for the briefest instant as he noticed something in David, an unnerving calm, a confidence that hadn't shown up in any of the reports. The officer's certainty dimmed just a fraction. He had been gambling on over 80% chance of success. It was still a gamble. Are you interested in making a bet with me? Fran asked. David reached into his pocket and produced a 50-cent coin, turning it between his fingers. What do you want to bet? He asked evenly. Fran forced a grin and told himself he was still in control, but unease crept up his spine. He hadn't paid much attention to this quiet kid before. Watching David now, he realized this wasn't just a farm boy who could beat up other kids. The way David had observed him, cold, dispassionate, as if watching an insect's last frantic movements, felt almost predatory. Fran's mind flickered to the possibility that whatever secret Clark hid, David might be more than just protective brother. And that thought tightened the gamble in Fran's chest. I've heard that, through history, there have been fighters among humans who, after enduring all kinds of torture, wouldn't give up a single secret, David said, holding a 50-cent coin between two fingers. A dangerous glint glittered in his eyes, and his casual smile did nothing to put Fran at ease. I'll bet you 50 cents you aren't one of those. If, in half an hour, you're not on your knees crying like a woman and telling me everything I want, your email, your password, I'll lose 50 cents, David added. A 17-year-old high school student, did you learn about torture on TV? Fran forced a laugh that sounded thin even to his own ears. The smile on David's face left him with the uncanny feeling of a predator sizing up its prey. Cold crawled down his spine, his hair prickled. David, what are you trying to do? Clark's face tightened, and he stepped between them. Those words, torture, inhumanity, trampling on dignity, sent a cold jolt through him. He couldn't believe his younger brother would do something like that, and he couldn't understand how casually David spoke about it. "Clark, are you really going to show mercy at a time like this?" David sneered. "If he doesn't come back on time, his email will send out that message. You might not even have time to interrogate him," Clark said urgently. He knew there wasn't room for talk. Whatever had to be done needed to be done quickly, and time was an enemy. "Maybe it won't take half an hour. 10 minutes will be enough," David said, then tried to push past him. "I don't think this despicable little rat will hold out." "No," Clark snapped, grabbing David's wrist. "David, I can't let you risk Mom and Dad." He pressed his voice low, trying to reach whatever stubbornness still remained. "Just give him what they want. They're just gang thugs." David raised an eyebrow, an expression of mock surprise. "I didn't know your bottom line was so flexible, Clark." This was criminal, plain and simple. Clark held on tighter. "I agree. But," he forced himself to calm, turning to Fran, voice taut. "Go, now. I'll come find you later." Fran looked at Clark, then at David. Something hard flickered across his face, relief, then resignation, and he moved off quickly. David started to step after him, but Clark's grip stopped him. For a moment, it almost looked like Clark had won. David straightened, adjusting his cuff, the 50-cent coin slipping back into his pocket. "Let me try, Clark," he said coldly. "If it works, fine. If it doesn't, what then?" His tone was level, ruthless. "You can't feed a hyena once and expect it not to come back when it's hungry." "You know you're not as fast as I am," Clark protested. "If I want to protect someone, you can't catch me." "You don't get it," David said. He sighed, almost pitying. Then, as if producing something ordinary from a pocket, he pulled out a small box and opened it. The lid snapped back and a thumb-sized green crystal glowed from within, bathing the alley in an eerie, sickly light. Clark's legs weakened as if someone had cut the strings holding them. He felt the life drain from him. His knees buckled and he staggered back, clutching the wall. "Duh, David," he managed. "Is that—" "A meteorite," David said simply. "From Jarek." Clark's eyes widened. He had seen the meteorite before, but never in David's hands. Before he could react, David closed the distance and struck. The blow landed like a hammer on Clark's jaw. Clark crumpled to the ground, unconscious. David tossed the glowing crystal beside him and, satisfied, walked away. At the end of the street, Fran was leaning nonchalantly against a lamppost, waiting. He hadn't trusted Clark to follow his own orders and hadn't gone far. "Who are you waiting for?" a cold voice said behind him. Fran turned. David stood there, expression unreadable. "Where's Clark? Did he go back on his word?" David asked. A look sharpened his face. "No, he can't make it right now." Before Fran could react, David moved like a shadow, grabbed him, and disappeared down a narrow side street. Fran came to on a hard floor in a deserted factory, his wrists bound tight to the arms of a wooden chair. Rope bit into his skin no matter how he strained. He couldn't move. A laptop sat open on a wooden table across from him. David was seated behind it, calm as if he were home doing paperwork. He pushed the 50-cent coin toward Fran, then rolled on a pair of surgical rubber gloves with an absurdly slow theatrical deliberation. A smile creased his face. "You're awake?" he said, amusement in his voice. He stood up, the gloves squeaking, and the smile widened into something that chilled Fran straight through. "Our bet has begun." Fran saw David walking toward him and tried desperately to pull away, but he couldn't. "Help! Help!" he shouted, his voice carrying uselessly through the empty factory. No one would come. David closed the distance with slow, measured steps, each footfall like a hammer. Fran's heart pounded and fear rose hot and immediate. "Listen," he forced out, swallowing, "imprisoning and harming a detective is a federal felony." He sounded like a frightened kid trying to bluff his way out. David didn't flinch. With a calm, clinical motion, he knocked the chair over, forced Fran's head back, and pressed a wet towel against his face. "Since its invention in the Middle Ages, waterboarding has been called one of the most inhumane tortures," he said without haste. There was a flat, cold amusement in his voice. "I like it. Simple, efficient, and no blood." "No!" Fran screamed as panic exploded through him. His head bucked, but the hand clamped on him was immovable. David lifted a heavy bucket with one steady arm and let the water pour, slow and relentless, over the towel. Fran choked and gurgled. The towel and water blocked his air. Within seconds, his lungs were burning, veins bulging in his neck, his legs kicking like a trapped animal. Take a deep breath. Dizziness is normal. David's tone was almost instructional. The waterboarding method forced Fran to swallow and gasp, drawing water into his stomach and lungs. His muffled screams filled the abandoned warehouse, then were swallowed by more water. From the Spanish Inquisition to modern intelligence services, 80% of those subjected to waterboarding succumbed. I hope you're not one of the 20%, Jack Fran. No. Fran's will fractured fast under the suffocating fear. After about 30 seconds, he began tearing for any way to show he would cooperate, but he couldn't speak, and his limbs were bound. 2 interminable minutes of that terror left him gasping and drifting. His hands and feet twitched uncontrollably. "That's enough," David said at last, setting the bucket down. People subjected too long to that treatment lost control of their bodies. He peeled the towel off. Fran crawled back into the light like a fish pulled from water. Snot and tears, pupils blown, face paper white. He gulped desperately for air until his breathing steadied enough for his eyes to focus. He looked at David as if pleading for mercy. David's expression shifted like someone remembering a small, satisfying detail. "Oh, right," he said, smiling faintly. "I forgot to tell you how to let me know you wanted to confess." Fran's gaze widened to terror. His teeth chattered. "Devil. You've wasted a lot of my time," David said, his smile gone, voice cold. "Time to tell me what I want to know, or would you prefer a second round?" Electric panic surged through Fran. I'll tell you. He would have knelt if he could have. He begged and stammered and promised anything. David's fingers tapped the keyboard. With a key press, he canceled and deleted a scheduled email. He closed the laptop and looked up at the still shaking man. "Thanks for your cooperation." Fran's lips trembled. You're not ordinary." David cocked his head. "Just now, when you tried to bite my cheek, your jaw, your grip was like iron. I couldn't move it an inch." Remembering the pain where his cheek had been mashed, Fran suddenly saw everything with a new horror. He stared at David like a man seeing a monster. Clark had treated his brother's actions like dealing with something dangerous. That promise and then disappearance now made sense. "You're stronger than Clark," he whispered. David bristled at the word monster. He stepped in close and cast a shadow over the bound boy. "I don't like being called a monster. I just have a few tricks to deal with Clark." Fran's breath hitched. What do you want to do?" Fear tightened into a physical fist. He regretted everything. "Please, let me go." "Sorry," David said softly. "The best way to keep a secret is a dead man." He flicked his finger. A 50-cent coin shot out like a bullet, striking cleanly. It tore through Fran's head and lodged in the brick wall behind him, spraying blood. The chair toppled. Fran's eyes widened in shock and unfairness. Then he collapsed, dead, dust rising around his body. The day after, in the attic of the warehouse after school, Clark paced and fumed. He'd kicked the kryptonite into the sewer that morning and searched the town for Fran, but found nothing. He threw the question at David, who stood calmly looking out into the night. "You killed him?" "Yes," David said. Clark blinked, stunned. "He was a detective." David's expression didn't change. "I handled it cleanly." He had no qualms about killing. He'd spared metahumans before, only for other reasons. Fran had been ordinary, useless alive. The body was buried beneath the concrete floor of the abandoned factory. No one would find him. Besides, David added, he may not even have committed any serious felonies. If he had, working in the department, he'd have been discovered long ago. Clark let out a dark laugh. "Your notion of innocence is laughable, brother." David had expected that response. He turned the laptop on the attic table, rotated the screen so Clark could see, and pressed play. Chapter 40, Kent Farm Sold. In the video, Fran sat tied to a chair, snot and tears tracking down his face as he confessed to crimes from his past. "I often helped gangs sell informant lists, secretly harmed colleagues with whom I had conflicts, sabotaged rivals to block their promotions, threatened people to steal business secrets. The things I've done would be enough to have me executed 5 or 6 times over." Toward the end of the recording, Fran spoke of his plan to control Clark. "If Clark won't listen, I'll teach him a lesson. I'll get bodies and illegal guns, hide them in the barn, frame your father for murder, put your father in jail. Only then will I truly have leverage over your family." His voice trembled as he confessed, and fear made his words ragged. But beneath the tremor, Clark could still hear the cold, calculating logic in Fran's plan. His brother had been right. He had been naive and had let himself hope. "I was wrong about this," Clark admitted silently. When the video ended, Clark looked at David, a flicker of displeasure crossing his face as he owned his mistake. He stared earnestly into his brother's eyes, worry written all over his face. "But you can't be killing people, brother. You haven't even finished high school. You can beat people into a vegetative state, torture confessions out of them, kill and dispose of bodies without flinching. I'm honestly a little scared." Strictly speaking, David was still a minor, yet what he'd done was enough to unnerve many adults. More than the deaths themselves, Clark worried about what that meant for David's future. Concern bloomed inside him, concern from Clark 35. Template fusion 96%, his mind noted, disconcerted. The thought of soldiers who killed in war surfaced in his mind. David asked once, "Are they uncontrollable, evil-minded murderers?" "Of course not," Clark said. "Defending one's country was not a crime." "Then don't bring it up with me again." David turned and left. "I'm protecting this home from any outside trouble or destruction." Watching his brother go, Clark opened his mouth to argue and then found no words. If David kept this up, Clark wouldn't be the only one who would worry. He feared a future where, left unchecked, David's actions would spiral until the situation could no longer be changed. Today, David had crossed the line into killing and seemed to feel no psychological burden, as if he had squashed a bug. That terrified Clark. It reminded him of the visions from Miss Cassandra. If those glimpses were true, David's power would not remain confined to protecting the home. Outside, cold rain streaked the windows. High above, on the top floor of a gleaming, glassy building that housed the Metropolis Environmental Center, a man in a suit and tie stood looking down at the people scurrying under umbrellas. His hair was slicked back, his face composed, his expression carrying the hunger of a fighter. "The view from up here is really something," a warm voice said, as a brown-haired man in a black overcoat came into the office, removing his leather gloves with a smile. "Good morning, Mr. Rickman. You honor us with your visit." Paul, the director, turned slowly, formal yet cautious. "Director Paul called me here. Is there something I can contribute to the Environmental Center?" Rickman, a billionaire who commanded hundreds of millions, sat across the desk and smiled. "I heard your organization is investigating Smallville and plans to acquire several farms. Does your agency have any concrete plans?" Paul placed a water sample on the desk and regarded Rickman with hard eyes. "This is a groundwater sample taken near a factory you recently built. The number of parameters exceeding safety standards is even higher than in other facilities tied to your name." Rickman barely glanced at the bottle. With a casual smile, he pointed toward the corner. "Did you know the water dispenser in your office was sponsored by my company? I had dinner with some of your colleagues only 2 days ago." "Not everyone can be bought," Paul said. "Tomorrow, I'll file a restraining order preventing your company from approaching that town." He stood, hands braced on the table, determined. "Listen to me. This benefits everyone. If you don't cooperate," Rickman's smile faded. Coldness flickered across his face. "I've reviewed the pesticide plants linked to your company. There are an unusually high number of employee poisoning lawsuits, ones you've managed to suppress." Paul produced a thick file and pushed it across the table. "I've contacted several plaintiffs. I'm going to refile the cases. Mr. Rickman, you'll be very busy from now on." For a few seconds, Rickman's eyes darkened. Then he laughed, shook his head in mock resignation, and placed a hand on Paul's shoulder, his palm brushing the back of his neck. For a moment, Paul's pupils dilated. When they returned to normal, an odd mix of admiration and closeness flooded him. He felt an inexplicable regret for having doubted the man who had supported the center for years. "I'm sorry, sir. It's all right, Director Paul," Rickman said gently, slipping into the tone of an old friend. He guided Paul toward the window. "I admire your fighting spirit, but I don't buy people with money." "You're right. I shouldn't have questioned your integrity." Paul's voice trembled with embarrassment. Rickman watched the city below. "Think about all the buildings out there. You pour your passion into protecting people's health and the environment, yet do you own any of these places?" "No, sir. My family and I still rent." Paul's brow tightened with sorrow. Rickman's face softened with genuine pity. Why live like that? Think about it, Mr. Paul. He patted Paul's shoulder and left. Later, in the Environmental Center's first-floor lobby, Rickman strode out like any successful businessman. Bang! A figure crashed down from above, smashing into a taxi at the entrance and sending a spray of blood across the pavement. Rickman's expression hardened as he shrugged off the incident and pulled out his phone. "Taylor," he said into the line, "I hear a few stubborn farmers are refusing to sell their land. Get the car ready. We're going to Smallville. I'll have a talk with them." The noon sunlight poured golden through the Kent house window. David and Clark opened the front door and stepped inside, expecting the smell of lunch, but the kitchen had no scent of cooking. The house felt unbearably heavy. "Dad? Mom? What's going on?" David called as they entered. In the living room, Father Jonathan sat at the dining table, worry etched into his face. Martha stood nearby, furious, cheeks flushed as if they'd just had a huge argument and neither could forgive the other. Such silence and tension were rare in their warm little home over the past decade. "What is this, Dad?" Clark asked, bewildered. He pointed at the stack of papers Jonathan was leafing through. "What are those?" Martha's voice was sharp as she shouted at her husband, eyes rimmed in red. "How could you do this without talking to me? Who told me this land would always be ours? Who promised we'd live here forever?" "What?" The brothers were stunned. Everything had seemed normal that morning. Now, after returning home at noon, their house and land had apparently been sold, overnight. David stepped closer, disbelief written across his face. "Father, did you really sell the Kent farm and our home?